you mentioned Phosani's for necks, which was kind of a meme initially, but I do understand that Phosani's Nightmare really did help out original Nightmare, giving a sort of like solo variant. And there are many players that do like the idea of being able to grind things without having to find teams and dealing with all that. So there's going to be much more I want to talk about just regards to Phosani's and necks in general and their drop rates especially. But I want to hear your idea for this sort of Phosani's necks and where that's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, to start off, I think that the Phosani update was really good. Because I know you grinded, and a few other Iron Men grinded green logs at the original Phosani's, at the original Nightmare, and insane amount of hours needed for that. And I just think next seems like the next obvious choice. It's a very long boss fight. It just seems like a no-brainer to me, especially for Iron Men. Why don't we make it a more dangerous instance? A lot more damage if you make a mistake. You have to be a skilled player to do it, but you get the reward of having a faster green log. The main thing you need to be careful about is, again, drop rates. You don't want this to be too overpowered. As far as I'm aware, Phosani's, when it came out, really affected the the prices of all the drops. But again, I just think that I think it's a fair price to pay to make it a better boss to grind. In terms of like mechanics, I haven't thought too much about what the mechanics should be, but I do feel like they should be similar to, if you're going to be rewarded so much, I do think it should be a hard piece of content like Phosani's. I think dodging things, I think if you make mistakes, it needs to be punished harder. Again, it's kind of like the T-Bow thing. You see a lot of Iron Men especially get really, really screwed over here. The only thing that I would, I suppose, find a bit sad about this update would be that I know there is a lot of mains who do go there for their main money making. So I don't know really if even have you thought about this at all, or how we might be able to mitigate, if they were to do this update, how they might be able to mitigate that, the money making side of things being poor.
Yeah, I'm not fully convinced we do need a Phosani's next, personally. I understand why people want it. I think over the last few years, I have leaned more into it's okay for there to be forced group content in a way. And I do think there are issues with necks, namely the drop rates. I think they're quite absurd. I don't think they need to be quite as rare. So that's already one thing. The other issue is just, I mean, this goes with all God Wars. I think they should have a better system for ecumenical keys. I was just talking with Tasty and the cast before, talking about how ecumenical keys I don't think should have a cap, personally. I think you should be able to grind out as many as you want and have them be stackable even. And I think ecumenical key shards, first of all, maybe if they're going to have an update that does have just ecumenical keys being stacked, I think ecumenical key shards could probably be a thing of the past, personally. And maybe you just occasionally get a drop of an ecumenical key that, again, is a now stackable item that can be in your inventory. So you're getting rid of that sort of annoyance. It just feels like a hurdle to just start killing the boss because of this kind of KC, this like ancient system of grinding KC just to be able to have access to the door, which again, you could still keep, but I do think a system where you can really just spend a full day grinding out all the keys and then not having to worry about it for a week or two or a month or however many you gather, I think could be a good system. And in regards to Phosani's, if the community did want it, because in their blog post for Phosani's Nightmare, they did say this is going to be a much harder fight. It's going to be balanced because of its difficulty. It's going to be a faster fight. But ultimately what happened is it just became the thing to do. And like doing normal Nightmare is just, I'm sorry, it's just so pathetic. It's just so horrible.
Now, isn't it?
Yeah, the drop rates are awful, and the fight itself is just so boring and so ass. Like they didn't even try to clean up that original fight where they really could have. Like there's elements of normal Nightmare that are more difficult than Phosani's because they just didn't clean it up. So I guess to fully answer, I don't really know what they would do in terms of the economy, because I do think of Phosani's next would drastically crash the prices of next items. and which is maybe partly the reason why I think it would be okay to keep that as a team-based thing. But I think they need to get rid of those annoying hurdles that make it so next is it just feels like a pain point of progression with gear. I don't know. It's just I
Yeah.
actually don't mind the fight though. That's the thing. Like I don't actually mind next. They've already cleaned it up a little bit. There's other elements, but man, there's just still some annoyances with it.
I think they have tried to address this, haven't they? With wasn't there an update recently where they made it quicker, the fight? Um, I haven't actually been back since they've done these updates, but it looks a bit better than it was.
Yeah.
I do think that you're seeing a problem here in that, since Iron Man was introduced, because I don't think any of this would have been debated before that, really. Because people would have just, if there was no Iron Man, they would have just masked this stuff. They wouldn't have ever questioned it, really, unless drop rates were crazy bad. But because of Iron Man mode, this is where the problem comes in. And I it's not realistic to make a Phosani's of every big boss, because it's just gonna, like you said, it's just gonna make the old boss bad to kill and pointless to kill, which is making dead content. But I do think you need to maybe do it for 2 or 3 bosses where you have these really important pieces of gear. And maybe, for example, if they weren't gonna do next something like Corp, because I feel like, what is it, 9 kills an hour or something for an Iron Man at Corp, making that the fight is so bad. The fight is so bad. It's just sitting there, specking it, tellying, going back over and over again, and then poking it for like 10 minutes. And I do think, maybe Corp, they should consider, I don't know about a Phosani's Corp, but just consider making it a more engaging boss fight. And giving you something to interact with more than just sort of 2 squares east for a dark core, 2 squares west for a dark core every second. So that's another boss I think that needs work as well, is Corp. Because again, it's just that syndrome of thousands of hours grind for Iron Man as well.
Yeah. Corp's one of those where it would make a little bit more sense because it already is something that people are grinding solo. So it's not like really destroying any metas necessarily. Corp has had so many evolutions with the Iron Man meta. I mean, it used to just be like the 3 Warhammer 7 Arclight 200 BGS damage. And now if you have like some other gear, I mean, a lot of people are just going in with like 2 Elder Mauls and then they just kill it with a Fang or whatever else they're using, a Halberd, or I don't even know what people are using these days because I just really haven't kept up with the meta, but it's gotten much, much, much more like streamlined. And I think there is that natural gatekeepiness, which I actually kind of enjoy. I enjoy the fact that Corp hasn't been completely revolutionized where you can kind of jump into Corp at an earlier level, because I feel like that's something that can be overlooked, is when you do change boss fights, it changes like what the threshold is of being able to kill it. So for example, like Corp was always locked behind a BGS, but if they were to change Corp, what if BGS is no longer even a thing? You can just jump into it because they've just streamlined it so much. You can just jump in sort of at any account level and just kind of grind out like the 175 Onyx bolts and kind of change some Iron Man metas potentially. And people have even suggested the like opposite of Phosani's, where they want a Corp to be a massable thing for Iron Men, which again comes into the same issues of like Iron Men being able to mass it, and then you can just go in there with a level 20 Iron Man that has an adamant crossbow and ruby bolts and just get a few kills and spoon some shit, which could have some negative effects on how Corp has always been perceived. So I think you have to be very careful with Corp. I'm not against it necessarily, but I think there's just so many things to consider before making drastic changes to a boss fight. And last thing I'll say on this sort of point is I am a little bit just personally am resistant to changing up boss fights just because of their old school nature. So people bring up KQ, for example. Now, I didn't kill the Echo bosses in Leagues, but I heard really great things about those sort of Echo bosses that could be a lot of fun. But I do think there's something charming and something to be said about classic old school boss fights that's just like a tank fest. I do think there's
Yeah.
issues with KQ. One is that it spawns all the way fucking across the edge of the room, which is just so stupid. The same thing with Corp. Corp tends to magnet toward the very opposite end of the cave, which is just like
Yeah.
holy fuck. Like shrink this cave, like make it so you're not having to run for 10 seconds just to hit it once. And KQ could deal with some of that, and KQ could also not completely ignore all of your defense, which I think is absurd. But yeah, there's a lot more to say on that. I'm just kind of going off, but do you have thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think, overall, it's not something I feel too passionately about. I think a lot of these points I wanted to bring up just because I think it's important, very important for the game to keep the Iron Man mode healthy and for people to want to keep grinding Iron Man mode because that is so many players now in the game. And I think that's where this is coming from. I've got a maxed Iron Man as well on the side. I've just kind of AFK'd it for long enough that it's maxed now. And I guess maybe I've got some vested interests because I've got all the supplies, I'm ready to go, and I just want everything to be a bit easier. But I also do have friends who've de-ironed, and I think the main issue, if I had to pick one, is Cox. And I do think that, like, you're right, it needs to be rebalanced. Something needs to change there. So that's like the number one thing I'd focus on. This idea of like having these old, sort of slightly clanky bosses that you don't if you don't really need the gear, I suppose it doesn't really matter. And it is thinking, old school in after 20 years, do we really want every boss to be like super hard? Probably not. So yeah, I see your point. I think it's fair to have, there is a bit of that sort of lovely nostalgia, isn't there, and having these sort of ridiculous bosses that act in these funny ways, as long as they're not locking really important gear, which
I enjoy the sort of old school bosses because it allows you to make it more complex. It allows the player to add complexity to a very simple fight. For example, KQ, you can do those step unders if you're using a 5-tick weapon, doing step unders and ring switches. And there's not just a bunch of weird other shit going on that kind of removes that ability to have complexity added for your own sake. I think like if you started summoning like a bunch of weird, I don't know, crystals that you now need to kill and like shock waves underneath you and just making it very like, I don't know, more modernized. I think that it just can get a little bit tiresome and just like, all right, well, time to deal with all these forced mechanics rather than me being able to choose whether I want to like, I don't know, take this a step further. I feel like,
and potentially
yeah.
if you overdo it, early game to mid game players might be like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And they might not want to
Yeah.
continue.
And
So
and KQ's got its own issues. I mean, the shortcut, that not passing a pole was the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. I mean, really, if you have
oh yeah,
80
that was bizarre.
if you have 86 agility, you should not be locked behind an elite diary to pass that shortcut.
I remember that one. That was one of the weirder ones. Yeah, for sure.
It's so bad. I mean, on this account, I was
Yeah.
very early level, and I had to grind 256 KQ to get the tattered head, and just to start
Oh
killing KQ
man.
normally. And it's like I'm running around this fucking maze, and I'd have to take like a stam sip before the run energy. I mean, with the run energy changes, I barely made it with one energy left from the fairy ring all the way in there just to be able to make it there. But it's just like, dude, this is so unnecessary. And I had 92 agility and I couldn't even utilize it because I just couldn't get the diary done. And the way to get the diary done is to get the fucking KQ head. Like,
Yeah.
it's so cursed.
I don't think people actually interesting with KQ because it was one of my, just quickly hopping back to the old days of old school. It was one of the first pets I grinded out, and KQ kills back then, my god, I can't, I think it was 20 KC, no, less than that, I can't remember. It was very few KC per hour because I was running there like you, and I didn't have the diary for half the kills, and I hated it. That was such a bad grind. I think it was part of the reason I quit at the time because KQ. But nowadays with alts, I've seen the meta. It's so good. It's so much better than it used to be, and that's just one example of how the game's progressed as well.
Yeah, and that's one thing I failed to mention because I do play Iron Man is like if you start modernizing these fights, what are you going to do with alts? Because I feel like when they modernize fights, alts become not as relevant or maybe even impossible to really use because maybe it's like an instance now or something. And I just feel like there's negative consequences to just modernizing all bosses.